I forget my destination.
Welcome to our session of the C# track of Fibonacci. And thank you for coming to tonight's session. Tonight we'll be looking at the next topics, the next 3 topics related to the Learn CS org that we've been using to keep track of our studies in C#. So tonight we'll try to go through the following topics, right? So strings, for loops, and while loops. So just like the previous sessions, feel free to let me know if there's something that you're getting confused about. So feel free to ask questions during the session. And if there's any other lingering questions that you may have, then I'd recommend that you attend the hack nights that we have on Wednesday nights. And in those sessions, we'll assist you in going through the recordings as well as the lessons on your own. So if you also like to work on the exercises, then you can go through it there. And we'll use a Pomodoro approach wherein we'll have 45-minute sprints of going through it on the topics on your own, and then we can have 15-minute collaboration sections wherein we discuss all the questions that may come up that you may have, and we can have 3 iterations of those Pomodoro sessions. So that's a good way to flesh out your understanding for the topics that we've been going through so far. Okay, so let's start with the first topic, which is strings. Right, so we went through the idea or the concept of strings in the previous sessions, and we mentioned how it is actually a value type, right? So it's like integer, it's like float, it's like double, and we use it to represent a string of characters, right? Now, to declare a string is very simple, and we went through this as well previously. You just declare the data type string, followed by the identifier of the variable, and then the equal sign, and then the actual string. So that will be enclosed in double quotes. And so what that does is it declares this variable here, and then it assigns a value to that variable that you just created. Okay, now, this is another way of declaring a string object wherein you call the object itself or the type itself. All right, so this is like a keyword here wherein you're using the string keyword to declare this variable. But you can also declare a variable using its class declaration or type declaration. So you can call string capital. So there's almost no difference. It's just a capitalization of the first letter so that you remember what it's doing. And then you assign the same thing, the value, to the variable. So what that does is whenever you call this myString variable anywhere in your code, it will contain this value here, right? Now, let's say you just want to create a variable, but you want to assign an empty string to it, right? So there are 2 ways of doing that. You can either call string.empty, like this, or you can assign 2 double quotes, one after the other, to indicate that this string has an empty string, or the 0 length string, as we may also call it. Now, a simple operation that you can do on strings is just to concatenate them, right? So let's say you have a variable containing the first name, and then you declare another variable containing the last name. Then you can create a full name. So here you basically create a combination which declares a full name variable, and then you assign 2 variables or 2 values to it, and then you call plus, right? So this is like addition, right? But actually what it's doing is it's adding, or it's appending this string. So you can see it's enclosed in double quotes. You're appending this string to the first string, which is Eric. right? And then you're again appending the last name to that space. So what's happening here is you're saying Eric, you want it to be followed by a space, and then you want it to be followed by the last name. So that's Eric space last name. So the full name is Eric Smith, right? Now there's another operator that you can use, right? So, and this is the plus equals sign, right? So what happens is it's like sentence will be equal to sentence plus chess. So what is the value of sentence? That is, I like to play. And then plus equals says that you just adding the word chess to this sentence here. So it's like syntactic sugar. So you must have, you may have heard of this in, I think the first or the second session. So it's just another way of saying this thing here, right? But the only difference is that you're adding, you're passing in the variable into the operation and then assigning the result of the operation to the same variable. So sentence is part of this operation because we're adding I like to play in the operation, and then you have the other operand in that operation, which is chess, and then assigning the result of that operation to the same variable here. So sentence in the end will then contain I like to play chess. Okay. Right. So was that clear? Was that did that make sense? Just let me know if you have any questions. Okay. All right. Okay. So the string function. Okay. So you can cast a non-string object into a string, right? Any non-string object, you can cast that into a string by calling the toString method. So all objects in the .NET framework has a toString method, right? So a number has a toString method. The classes that you create yourself, like for example, you create a friend concept or a friend class that will have a toString method as well. So all objects, it is a universal method, has a toString method, okay? Now, if you call that toString method, what it will do is it will convert the value of the variable that you're calling the string method on and convert that into a string version. So if you say 1, right, and then you assign it to integer, right? So this is an integer, as we can see here. This is an int variable. So if you call a toString method on this variable, what it will do is it will convert this integer into a string. So you will then have a 1 value for our string, but it's a string, it's not an integer. As you can see, the difference is that integer has no double quotes around it, right? And this one, the result will be a string value, wherein the other difference is, in addition to the data type, is the operation that will result if you call, for example, the plus operator on it. So what I mean by that is, if you call the plus operator on a string, right? So let's say you have string on either side of the plus operator. What happens is it concatenates those strings. But if you pass in integer values to a plus operator, what happens is it does a mathematical add operation. So that's the main difference. So the data type determines the results of your plus operator. Okay, but in this case, you just need to remember that the string method just makes sure that your data type or the resulting data set type is converted into a string. Okay. Right, so any questions regarding to string? Or let me know if we're going too fast. Feel free to let me know. Feel free to post your questions as well in the chat box, if that's all right. Okay, cool, all right. All right, so string formatting. Okay, so what are we doing here? So let's go line by line, okay? So we are basically declaring integer variables here, right? So x equal to 1, y equal to 2, and so on. So x is an integer, right? And y is an integer. So as we said earlier, since these are integers, calling the plus operator on our operands will result in a mathematical add operation. So 1 plus 2 will result into 3, right? Now, this method here, what is it? Okay, so the string.format method basically uses this string. As you can see, this is a string. It's closed in double quotes, right? It uses this string and uses it as a template of a resulting string. Okay, so by template, I mean that, okay, the format here declares a placeholder, right? So you can say, okay, this open curly braces, 0. This here represents an index in the second parameter of this method. So this x here, since this is the first parameter after the string template, this will go into here, into this placeholder here. This second parameter goes into here. And this parameter goes into here. Remember, in C#, arrays or indexes start with 0. So that's why this represents 0, this represents 1, and this represents 2, because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So when you call string.format, it accepts multiple parameters. The first is, again, the template that you want your data to go into. And the succeeding parameters represent an array of parameters that start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can rearrange this numbering here depending on where you want these values to go in. But the point is, they will go in to the corresponding placeholder location. So if 0 is here, for example, at the last part, then 0 or x will go into here. All right, so that's why. So what will happen is, if you call this console.writeLine some calculation, it will represent this value with the corresponding values. So 0x goes into 0. So it will say 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. So don't worry if it looks complicated, but what we can do is we'll try it here so you can see it working, and then we'll play around with it. Okay, so let's just tab this. If you run it, it says 1 plus 2 is equal to 3, right? Because x went into this placeholder, y went into this placeholder, and then sum, or this value, whatever the value here, went into this placeholder, which is 3. So as I said a while ago, you can interchange these locations. So you can even say 0, 0, 0, it doesn't matter. So you can say 0, 0, 0, right? And what will happen is x will go into here, x will go into here, x will go into here as well. So if you run it, it will say 1 plus 1 is equal to 1. So this is just like a template. You know, this is a template of how you will format your data. And this is very useful in logging, especially since points of your code and so on. And if you want to have an understanding, if you want to forward the values in a log file so you can use it for forensics, or you want to understand what's happening in your code. So this is what normally string format is used for. Okay, so you can have like Okay, you can just say my favorite number is 0, and then I like whatever is passed in as the second parameter, and then let's say I hate whatever is passed in as the first parameter. So X, this is the first one, goes into here. This one is the second one with an index of 1, so it goes into here. So 0, 1, 2, right? So this one has an index of 2, so it goes into here. So if you run that again, it will process it like this. Right, so remember, this is only for declaring a template so that that's where your values will go. Right? There's another way of doing the same thing. I mean, you may want to use concatenation instead. So this is like, again, syntactic sugar for being able to say the same thing. So you can say X, right? It's just doing the same thing, that's all. So you can say, I like, you can use concatenation, right? And then I hate Y. Right, so that's all that we're doing. So if you run it, right, so my name is 1, I like, so just to make it look better. So it's essentially the same thing. So you can see we just used concatenation to achieve the same result. So there are different ways of achieving the same thing. It's really up to you how you use the available functionalities. But you have to consider the effects of those choices, because some choices are more economical, they don't consume as much memory, and some are more expensive. Right? So some are more readable, some are harder to understand for coders, and ideally you should consider readability. That's covered in one of a very popular book in software development, which is called Clean Code. And the goal is to ensure, this is a very nice book. I haven't really read a lot in this book, but if you get this book and have an understanding of it, it's about being responsible with your code. You want to ensure that whoever comes after you in your development will be able to continue your work. Because if no one can maintain your code, then your code will die. Yeah, that's a reality. Okay. Right. Okay. So any questions regarding what we discussed so far? Is that clear? I hope I was able to clarify the purpose of that. Okay. All right. So no questions. Okay. So what is substring? Now, substring is a method which is used to extract a string inside another string. So that's why it's called substring. Sub, which is a prefix for something under or inside something else. So when you say full string substring 5, then what happens is, right, so as you can see, full string has a value of full space string, right? So if we do it this way, if we say full string dot substring 5, remember, you could think of this string literal as an array of characters, right? So what happens is this character has an index of 0 again. Remember, arrays in C# start with 0. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, and this final character is 5, right? So when you say full string dot substring 5, what it will do is it will count 5 indices. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So since it's the 5th position or 5th index, then part of string will then be string. So substring basically says anything before the index specified here, remove that, and then just retain whatever comes after the 5th index. So what happens here is it will get this substring and then assign it here. So again, this is another method. This is like string.format that you have here. Okay. Now, there's another parameter in addition to the first parameter that you specify here. The second parameter is specifying the length from that starting position. So when you say 3, what happens is it starts from this, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then count 3 characters from there. So 1, 2, 3. So then the shorter part will say str. The part of string will then say the whole word string. Okay, so just to make it easy to remember for you, if you don't specify the second parameter, it will get everything from the index that you specify. If you specify the second parameter, it will start from the index that you specify and then count from there to get the number of characters that will be taken from that string. So if you run this, you will see string and str. Right, string or str. So let's just play a bit with it. So let's say 4, then this will be stri. Let's say we start later on in the string, then it will be trin. Right? Let's say we start from the second index, the first index, then it will get us full string, so without the f. Right. Is that clear? Did that make sense? So always remember, you don't have to worry about remembering all of this now. Okay, all you need to do is to get some familiarity so that when you feel like you need these functionalities when you're coding, you then are able to just think back to it. Oh, okay, I think there's something like that that can be used, and then you use Google. Just Google it. That's what I do. Really, that's all I do. I'm not really a programmer. I'm more like a Googler. And then I just try to implement what I remember and then what I see as a guide. Okay, you have to really just remember the basic ideas. You don't have to remember all of it. Okay, and then once you do that, you will then gain muscle memory, and so then it becomes automatic for you. Okay, so is that clear? Do you have any questions so far? Okay, all right, I think that's clear. Now search and replace. Okay, so what does this method here do? Okay, so this is a method of, again, the string data type. So if you call .replace on a string, so remember we already discussed format and then we already discussed substring, right? So those two methods. Now this method here, this replace method, what it does is it looks for that. So it accepts 2 parameters, okay? The first parameter is what you're looking for in the string. And then the second parameter is what you're using to replace that string if it's found in the original variable. Okay, so when you say name that replace John, then what it will do is it will look for the string John inside the variable that you have, and then it will replace it with the second parameter, which is Eric. Okay, so it will replace it with Eric. So this will then read Eric Doe. So it doesn't matter how long the replacement string is, as long as it finds the first parameter, it will replace it automatically for you. So if we run this, so John Doe, and let's say we do something else. Let's say the quick brown fox, the quick brown fox. So if you run that, the quick brown fox Doe. So it replaced the word John with this string here. If, let's say, we just look for the letter O, so wherever it finds O, it will then replace with the quick brown fox. So if you run it, you see that O has been replaced with, let's say here, with the quick brown fox. So that's O and this one was O. Right. So again, this goes back to the idea of abstraction in the first session. You don't really need to understand how it's doing it behind the scenes. By just using abstraction, you know that this method does this. So you don't have to go inside and, you don't have to have a full understanding of how it's running in the background to do that operation for you. And that's what these methods are for, right? So they give you tools that you can use in your coding so that you don't need to think about it or even recreate something from scratch. So you can use this anywhere you need string operations. Okay, now index off. Okay, so by the way, before we go to index off, which is the last subtopic, do you have any questions? We're going too fast. Do you have any clarifications? Okay. Okay. Right. So index off. What does index off do? Index off really just gives you the index. Just like the name says, it gives you the index of a string inside another string. So remember earlier, we said that index is the position in this string, in this character array, which is the string. So again, we start with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So 6. So what will happen is found orange in position 6. So it will say found, if you evaluate this expression, it will say 6. So this will say found orange in position 6. How about lemon? Since lemon is not in this string, in the fruit string, then it will return a -1 value. So when you say found lemon in position, -1. So if you run this, oh, sorry, it's pasted here. Then it will result in those values. So 6 and then -1. So you don't have to, again, you don't have to worry about completely understanding what's going on. As long as you have the idea of what the method does, and after using it consistently and using it in actual coding, you'll get muscle memory. So it will become automatic to you. Right? So as long as you know that these are what these method does, that should be enough. Right? And the important thing is to be able to practice it and use it in actual coding. Right? So I guess we can skip this. I think it's a very simple exercise. So I'd encourage you to do this exercise yourself. If you can also join the session that we have this Wednesday. So I would encourage you to go through each of the exercises yourself so you can practice it and gain muscle memory in coding. So the time comes that you don't even have to think about it. It just comes to you, just like riding a bike, right? Initially it's difficult, but as long as you practice consistently and do it on a regular basis, then it will become automatic to you. It will become like eating breakfast, right? Okay, so any questions regarding the string topic? Okay, that's cool. All right. So the next one. So this is a bit challenging to understand. I had some problems understanding this when I was starting, but as I said, as long as you practice this and are able to use it, you'll get the hang of it soon enough. Okay. So loops. Loops is a way to control the flow of the execution of your code, right? So if you look at the code here on the right, you can see that whenever this code is running, it will run code, gradually. So it will run this line 8 first, it will then run line 9, and then it will run line 10. So that's how the flow of the execution takes place normally, right? Now using loops like this, you're able to control the flow using conditions. and using variables. So what happens is you could think of it as just like another method, right? Because remember, a method is an action or an instruction which you pass in multiple values to. So if we have, like if we go back to string, let's say you have a string var, string name is equal to Elmer, right? And then you say name dot substring 2, and then 1 character, right? Remember, this is a method, right? So you're passing in 2 parameters to this method, right? So the first one is the position, and the second one is the length of the extraction that you'd like to perform. Now you could think of this loop as just another type of a method where you pass in, just to keep it consistent for you and hopefully to make it easier for you to understand. You are basically passing 4 things in this method. So you say 4 is a method. You pass in the first parameter, the second parameter, the third parameter, and then the fourth parameter. So what are we doing here? The first parameter in your method is the variable that you'll use to count the iterations of this loop, right? So you're saying, I'm going to use the I variable and initialize it with a value of 0, right? The second parameter is basically the condition that needs to be satisfied for this method or for whatever is passed here to run again and again. So as long as this condition is met, then this loop will run continuously. Okay. Now, the last parameter here indicates the change that will be done to your variable, right? So what happens is I++ basically means that you want to increment this value with 1 every time, or with a value of 1. So let's say I is equal to 0, right? So I is less than 10. So what will happen is I is equal to 0, all right? That's assigned a value of 0. I is less than 10. Is I less than 10? Yes, that's true. So then it will go and execute what the code in here. And then once that is done, once this execution is done, it will then do this I++. So it will increment I with 1, and then it will go back to the start of the for loop. And then it will check, is I still less than 10? If it is still less than 10, it again will do the code. So let's say you have this code in there. It will again run that code inside the braces. And then after that is done, it will again add 1 to I, and then it will go back here. And then evaluate again, and so on. So it's basically saying, let's do this until this is met. All right, so let's do this. Let's do something. This is something. So in just plain English, what we're saying is, let's do this. Let's start with this counter and do this as long as the counter is less than this, as this is true, as long as this is true. And then once each iteration is done, add this value or change the counter with this, right? So as you can see, it looks complicated, but it's just really an instruction of doing something again and again until a condition is met, right? So before we go into an example to clarify it further, I'd just like to ask, did that make sense? Do you have any questions about the theory behind this construct? Hopefully that was clear. Feel free to ask questions, huh? That's great. That's great. Okay. Please don't be shy about asking questions. Huh? There's no such thing as stupid questions. All right. So again, this loop will do that. So before we go to the example, there's an important instruction or command or keyword that you can use. So let's say the condition that needs to be met is 1,000,000, right? So of course we don't want, sometimes you wouldn't want these set of instructions to execute again and again up to the millionth time, right? Sometimes there are specific conditions that when met, you want your loop to break. So that is what the break keyword is for. So if this execution goes again and again and again in a loop, you can then say, okay, when let's say, because what will happen here is that after each iteration, it will add 1 to I, right? So that's what this operator does. It's called the unary operator, by the way. If you want to search for it, unary operator. Right. So this is the keyword that you can Google. So this is a unary operator. And then if, let's say, it reaches 12, you want it to break. You want it to end. You want this loop condition to break. So that's what the break is for. Because sometimes there are conditions that need to be, that when met, you want to interrupt the execution. Right? Okay. So also there are other times that you don't want the operation to stop. Let's say you just want the code to again go to the next iteration without processing any further code. So let's say you have 10 steps, like 10 things that you want a process to do, right? 10 instructions, 10 lines. And when a certain condition is met, you want it to go to the next iteration. You want that iteration to break but not stop the whole loop. Then you can use the word continue. Right? So remember, the difference between break and continue is that break stops the whole loop abruptly, completely. Continue doesn't stop the for loop, but it skips the processing of the subsequent instructions and then makes it go back to the start of the loop and resume with the next counter value. All right. Okay, so, right. So it lets you skip straight to the next iteration. Okay. So if we do this, right? Copy this method here. Then what it will do is just try not to look at this formatting because I don't think this will format it properly for us. But what it will do here is that it will start the loop with an I value of 0, and it will continuously go until I is equal to 16 or greater than 16. So this will continue again and again, and it will increment I by 1 every time, right? So what will happen here is, let's say this is 2, right? Let's say this is 2. Let's say this is 1. I can't remember. If 1 is modulo 2 is equal to 1 equal to 1, I think that should be. So this is like, this operation is like first number divided by 2 and then get the remainder, right? So if like, I think 3 divided modulo 2 equal to 1. I can't remember exactly, to be honest with you. But I think the best way is really to run it to see the result. This will be 3 modulo 3. It will continue, right? So if it's 0 modulo 2 equal to 1, then it will skip, right? If it's 1, if the value is 1 modulo 2 is equal to 1. Okay. Okay, that was false. All right, sorry. So 0 modulo 2 is equal to, this is not true. So basically it doesn't evaluate to true. So that's why it writes 0 here, right? If 1 modulo 2 is equal to 1, I believe it resulted in a true condition. So that's why you don't see 1 here, right? So what it's saying here is that if the number, if the I variable is divisible by 2, it's not divisible by 2, then it will continue. But if it's divisible by 2, then it will be printed here. So that's why all the even numbers have been printed in this console.write line. So it did this processing again and again whenever the number is divisible by 2. So is 3 divisible by 2? So 3 divided by 2. So how many 2's do you have? There's 1, 2, and there's a remainder of 1. So you have this. So 5 modulo 2. So that's 4. So right, the number divisible inside 5 is 4, right? And there's a remainder of 1. Again, it's 1. So it goes in here, continue, and skips this one. So whenever there's a remainder, it goes back up. Okay. So feel free to let me know. Is there any questions about this processing? If there's something that you'd like to understand further about for loops, something that you think wasn't clarified enough. Yes, we can also use decrementing. So as you can see here, we used ++ operator, which is a unary operator for incrementing by 1, right? So you can do it the other way around if you like. So instead of initializing I to 0, you can also initialize it to a bigger number, let's say 20. And then, so you can say 20, and then as long as the number is greater than 0, then it will keep on doing the loop, right? And then instead of adding, since you want it to count down, you can use I minus minus so that it will decrease by 1. It will start from 20, and as long as it's greater than 0, then it will count down to 0, decrement, and then you will use minus minus here. Right. Sorry. So is that clear? Is there any other questions? So this loop, this construct is very useful when you're processing large amounts of data, right? So let's say you have 1,000 records of people or users. Then you don't want to code for each user, right? So let's say you have 1,000 user records. Then you wouldn't want to process each record individually by creating code for all of them, right? So I guess the best way to show how it works is through an example, maybe in the next hack session. But just to think of it from a theoretical perspective, you don't want to create thousands of lines of code to process thousands of records, right? So ideally, what you would do is you would just start a for loop by doing this. And you can say, as long as there's a record to process, or I is less than the total number of records, then you can then have instructions in here that will process your code for you, that will process your records for you. All right? So this can point to an integer index in your array. So you can say, remember in the example that we had earlier, you can then process each letter. Let's say you have a string, right? You then want to replace each letter or remove each letter or write line each letter one by one. Okay, so that's how you can use the loops for that. So let's just create a very basic example. So let's say you have string name is equal to Elmer, right? Then you want to start with position 0, and you want to name that length, right? So while I is less than the length, so this is 5, and I++, let's say you want to write console.writeLine to each position or each character inside that string. So what this will do is it will write each of the letters of this variable into a separate line. So if you run it, Elmer, right? So what it did was it created a variable. We created a variable to start from the beginning. And we're saying that as long as the position is less than the length, so what is the length? 5, right? And the position is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? As long as it's less than the length, then it will process this string for you. It will do this instruction as long as the integer is less than the length. And it will increment I with 1 every time. So what happened here is that console.writeLine was called for each value of I. So in the first instruction, it said console.writeLine, pass this array, which is a string character array, which is a character array, and then this is the position in that array. So I was 0, right? So this is 0. That's why I printed E here. And then the second iteration, it went to the second or to the position 1. So the value of I is now 1. So name, open, close, bracket, square brackets, 1 is L. So it printed L. And then it started again, it restarted again, and now this is a value of 2. So this is now 2. So name position 2 is M, so that's M, and so on. Right? So I could have done it another way. I could have done it a brute force approach. I can just say like this. So I can just say console.writeLine 0 or console.writeLine. Okay, what am I doing? Console.writeLine 1 or console.writeLine 5. And so on, or even up to 1,000. Let's say this is 4. Right? So I could have done that this way, but this is difficult because if, for example, you have 1,000 letters that you want to print, and you call run, then that would be difficult, right? So if you use a loop like this, then you can make your code elegant. So it's not redundant. There's no redundant code. You don't repeat yourself oftentimes, and you just have a very simple code, which is, I hope there's an undo function here. So it's much simpler. So let's say you only have to change in several places. So let's say in the previous version, it's much more complicated. If you wanted to make a change in your code, you have to pinpoint the exact location in the line and so on. But here, if let's say we want to start from the second position or from the second index, then you just change it here. So it will just say MER. Right, so very small changes or very simple implementations enable very powerful results. Okay, so unfortunately we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, is that clear? And actually the subsequent topic is very similar because the subsequent topic is about while loops, and that's very similar. I hardly use while loops, to be honest with you. I mostly use for loops. So once you get an understanding of how this works, then while loops should be easy, because this is more complicated than while loops, I would say. Okay, so are there any questions? Hopefully that topic was clear. Welcome, Mattias. You're welcome. What did you mean by don't think so, Carlos? Do you mean that while loops would not be simple, or? Okay, no questions. Okay. All right, cool. All right, so as I said, feel free to join us in the Hack Nights every Wednesday. I'll post it in our Slack channel if there are any changes to the schedule, but I would encourage you to join us there. If you have any questions, that would be a great opportunity for you to clarify them. And if you'd like to go through the exercises in an assisted manner, then please join us there. And we will also be discussing the projects that we have where you can do the actual practice, where you can actually try what you're learning in our sessions. And hopefully we can see you there in that session. And I think if we're able to keep it up, we might be at our third from the last session, right? Because we have while loops, methods, basic classes, and class properties. So we might just have 2 sessions more. And thank you so much for joining us this far in our sessions in this track in Fibonacci. Cool. Right. Thanks everyone. Thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the weekend. Please feel free to like and subscribe in our YouTube channel. And thanks again. Have a great weekend. Bye.
I am Keithreen and I am your computer.